How's everyone doing this morning? Thanks for waking us up, Marjorie. We good? Okay, so prior to coming here, maybe a week beforehand, we all had a chat online. Jim, I know you weren't able to join us, but I'm sure you can just get right in there with us. But it was a really generative discussion about the ways in which Métis folks have been instrumental to change making in Indigenous arts, not just in the more recent past, but kind of throughout the whole history of contemporary Indigenous art and institutional work. So I'm sitting here with some incredible change makers, some of whom I'm sure you all know. And so I just kind of wanted to start in the present, give Tristan the floor, because what you've done the last few years is incredible, and I just want to honor that and start with your leadership and the change making you've been doing. So could you tell us a bit about what you've done?
Sure.
Yeah.
So in brief, in the summer of 2020, that was the first time since I was 9 years old that I didn't have a whole fiddle travel scheduled. Because of COVID, it shut everything down and everybody was locked up, isolated, socially distanced, going through their own emotions that were surfacing within that forced enclosure and sequestering. And I was not really coping too well in that I was reading a lot of journalism every day, like maybe 2-3 hours a day. And I remembered something a friend of mine who's a widow told me. After her husband passed, one of the things that helped her move through her grief and process her emotions was walking. And she would pick a farm road, she would begin to walk in the morning, and when she would get tired, she would turn around and she would walk home. And that's what helped her through that. And as I was reading about the civil unrest in the United States after the George Floyd incident and various other heavy, racially charged, kind of vicarious trauma type narratives of contemporary issues affecting Indigenous people in Canada and African Americans in the United States, how I dealt with that rage, that anger, the surfacing of this grief was by walking. And I would go walk in this park, and it was like a modest 3 kilometers a day, then it turned into 5, then it turned into 10, and then my uncle died. I was on my way to the hospital to visit him, and the nurse said, "You can't see him today, please come back tomorrow." I went home, lit a candle, and within an hour I got the phone call that he had died. And he was sober for, I don't know, I want to say 20 plus years, and had been addicted to some substances in Vancouver, etc. Had a pretty rough chapters through the ages that I am now. And I was just admired his resilience, his courage, his determination to better himself, to better his community. His name was Rick Richardson. He was from Green Lake. And I thought, I'm going to honor his memory by doing a year of sobriety. And then I quit all substances. And I would like to have a glass of wine or two during this COVID pandemic lockdown, visit my family, visit my friends. And then I just quit cold turkey. And all these emotions just started like swirling. And then I read an article the night that my uncle had died, that a suicide prevention bill was unanimously voted down by the Conservative majority in the province of Saskatchewan, despite the fact that Saskatchewan has the highest suicide rates per capita in Canada. And a lot of the crisis happens in the northern communities that I live in, and amongst the students that I teach my music practice to. And I thought, that's horrific, the lethal depth of their indifference. Because these rates weren't statistics to me, they weren't anonymous numbers. There was faces, there was memories, there was names, there was loss, there was experience, there was families left behind. And I thought, I want to humanize this issue. And I don't want this article to be buried amongst the all of the other articles that are going to come out in even just a 48-hour cycle. Because this should stick in Saskatchewan's historical memory, because that was kind of a horrific, overt display of indifference and racism, because this issue disproportionately affects Indigenous people. So I decided I'll walk to Regina. I've been walking every day anyway, might as well walk somewhere. So I decided I'll start on Canada Day, and that'll be my historical, like, little bit of like raining on the parade, so to speak. So I had about 10 days to plan this walk. And so in 10 days it came together. I had a group. We walked 635 kilometers in the month of July to the Legislative Assembly building in Regina. And then we set up a teepee. I fasted in the teepee for 44 days because there was 44 members of the Legislative Assembly who voted down the bill. So I thought, okay, I'll fast one day for each of them. And then that number 44 will stick in people's heads. And on my walk down, because I'm a photographer and a very visual thinker, I asked families to submit photos of loved ones that they had lost to suicide so that I could make a portrait gallery around my teepee, and kind of had the teepee nested in images of the faces that we've lost, some children as young as 8 years old. I had family on that lawn, and some of my family who are educators had students on that lawn. And I decided to put the youngest people right at the doorway so that every politician, every newspaper man, every journalist, every white person that wanted to turn this into some intellectual debate as though I have some emotionally safe academic distance from this subject would have to look at those faces before they open their mouths and then try to discredit what I'm doing. And it usually shut them up, so it worked. And I stayed there for 44 days. But I had said publicly that if the government passes that bill, the fast is over and I'll go home. And that kind of got a lot of public outrage in that people, as the fast would continue, would be like, why aren't they passing the bill? And then they did in the spring, which kind of showed they had the power to do it this entire time, but chose not to. The Premier did not come to talk to me, despite the fact he posted a few weeks earlier that reconciliation is a journey that we must all walk together. And I remember when a CBC journalist came to talk to me, I said, the Premier mentioned on his Twitter that reconciliation is a journey we must all walk together, and here I am sitting across the road peacefully, sitting on the lawn drinking a cup of tea, and he refuses to take a single step. And he didn't take a single step. He sent the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs to come and talk to me, who is also the head of the Provincial Capital Commission in charge of the bylaws and maintenance of the park. And in that professional capacity, she had hired lawyers to hold me in civil contempt, charged me, took me to court. So there's our Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs showing us how diplomatic she can be with Indigenous people, that she should be in a relationship of reciprocity, communication, and collaboration with. They lost. The Crown versus Durocher. And they were trying to say that I was breaking a park bylaw, and I was saying, yes, but I'm protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, because it was a ceremonial fast, and right to peaceful assembly. So why are you trumping Canada's second highest law under the treaty with a municipal park bylaw? That was a good question. And so, so anyway, they had to change the law, which is nice. So I think Indigenous people, as we become more informed and more articulate in this legal ways of understanding the governance of this land, blah blah blah, we could use their own logics against them, And so we did. We used their own logistics against them, and they lost because we made better arguments. And also, like, there was drag racers all night up and down the street, squealing their tires, and there was drinking in the park. There was so many bylaws that I was seeing broken every single day I camped. And the geese were more harassing to the public on that lawn than I was. But they were more legally protected on that land than I was. And so it was just very ironic that they're saying, you know, we must hold him in civil contempt. And I'm thinking, but I'm breaking these laws in the context of a larger issue that's aiming to make a change and a difference in regard to the greater public good. So why can't they see that? And they didn't. But anyway, then the fast ended. I rode off into the sunset into northern Manitoba, out of self-service range, and I taught my 500 students across 4 different communities north of Thompson, and just sequestered myself. And then I kind of got a little bit of flack of like, well, where is he now? Where did he go? I thought he was building momentum, and then he just disappeared. And it's like, you guys, think of the geese thing, right? I was there for, I don't know, 2 months. It absolutely exhausted me. It was emotionally taxing. I would say psychologically damaging, and the overt hate and racism that I was subjected to by members of our public. And so I didn't have the ability to stay at the forefront of this. And I went back and I started doing what I was doing before this all happened, which was trying to inspire, uplift, and give youth an emotional vocabulary that could express what they're feeling in the context of music. So that's what I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're an inspiration to us all, so Marcy Miigwech.
Thank you.
I just want to pull on threads that you kind of talked about, and Auntie Marjorie, you also walk, and you walk for water, and you do that work of bringing awareness to the Saskatchewan rivers. So could you talk about maybe a little bit about that, and then I'm going to kind of move towards talking about arts activism
Yeah.
and change.
Well, I just want to respond to the youth possibilities too. Like there's a group in Saskatoon called Choke Cherry Studio, and they live in the hood, and they respond to events that are happening to them and in their lives and in the world with their art. And like when the babies were found, those 214, the next day they were at the riverbank doing ceremony and painting. Right here on River Landing, 214 stones orange, and doing it in ceremony. They do smudge walks through the community regularly. They whenever there's an issue, they go to the studio, they make some posters or banners, they go out. Whenever, if there's an event, they did a Un-Canada Day, and there was like thousands of people that showed up. Like they're influencing a lot of people because they're standing up in their truth with their that power that they have. So you don't need a lot of money or stuff to do things. Like if your intention is clear and you're going forward in a good way. And so I think for me, when I think about change, I think these are the people that give me hope. That the youth are being supported, because it wasn't always so. And I remember back in the youth would go on blockades and do all kinds of different protests and sit-ins and stuff, and there was nobody there besides them, you know? So things are changing that way, in the sense that we're more supportive. I think we all have to do what we have to do. And this river that we're sitting by, you know, it's dying, and we talked about this for a long time. I remember sitting at the crossing with Maria and looking at that river, and we got to walk it, you know, and so I started to think about that, and I have a big mouth, and I do workshops and things, and this was with the Unitarian Church. I had been doing a series with them of conversations about reconciliation, so I wasn't interested in anything else. And so what can we do together that will change things? And then I had mentioned about the water and this river, and that also told them about grandmother Joba, who Mandamin, who walked all the Great Lakes and all the rivers to help them. And so I had always wanted to walk with her, but I never did, and then she passed, and then most of these water walks were happening down east. And I thought, we got to walk for this river, so they came, so I told them that story, and then the next thing I know, people showing up at my door asking for a water walk, you know, here's some tobacco. I said, oh my God, you don't even know what you're asking. I don't even know what you're asking. Like all of it, like I know it's a ceremony. So I went and asked the people from the Medewin Lodge what the ceremony was and how to honor it. And so, yeah, we walked the North Saskatchewan River from the mountains in Jasper, and all the way to Prince Albert the first year, and last year the South Saskatchewan River, because that was the one here, that starts 70 kilometers east of Medicine Hat, and comes all the way back to PA. The two of them join up there, and then they go north to Lake Winnipeg. And so this year there was only a few of us, and it was very hot. And so we didn't finish. I was planning to get to PA this year, but it didn't happen. We stopped at Riverhurst, where there's a place there called Diefenbaker Lake, and that is not a lake. It's an expansion of the river for recreational purposes. You know, just before that, we were at Saskatchewan Landing, and that's where they're building this multi-million dollar, $40 million project of irrigation for the farmers, because we're in drought. We have been for several years, and it's going to get worse. So they're draining the river to irrigate their crops. And so we're walking through that territory, and in ceremony, so we have to be nice. And and like these people saying like, well, what are you doing here? And we're walking for the water to help. And oh, it's good this year. We got rain, right? Like that short-term thinking. So it's like, what is, you know, our responsibility in that? So I you know, we just pray for them. Like that's all you can do. And keep walking, and yeah, helping that river. So that's just like, for me, change, like, or I do whatever has to be done, whatever's in front of me, and you never know what it's going to be. It's just like you don't know what's going to start you doing something that you never ever thought you would do. So that's. How many people here, for example, have heard of the Aboriginal Film and Video Art Alliance? Okay, so a few. Like this was back in the 90s, early 90s, when we had no place. There was no APTN, there was no place for media. There was no, and Will Campbell called together a meeting of artists with Cleo Reese in Edmonton. And most of we didn't have that many filmmakers like around doing work, because there was no place to do it, and nobody was funding our stories. And so we started that, Will had that gathering, and out of that, the alliance was formed. And the goal of it was to have a place where we could explore the oral storytelling traditions and principles in a contemporary way through the media that we had. That was basically what the goal was, to have self-governing in our stories and find a way to do it together. And so we had all this, so we had these gatherings at BAM. The first one was storytellers and media. And as we gathered, we also set up how we wanted to be together, like what we're doing now again. Like we had a council of elders, and we invited people from all the different places across the land, not just our friends. Sometimes people we didn't even like. But everybody could be there and explore together how that would work. And at that first gathering, I was chosen, I didn't, as the runner to be the bridge between the BAM Center for the Arts and the communities, like the cultural ambassador, if you will. That was the title that was given to me at that gathering. So I had to go and make relations with the BAM Center and connect with the needs that the community had. And I did that for 3 years. There was no Indigenous arts programs at the arts councils. I went to the Canada Council. I asked for a meeting with all of them together, and they never did that very much. They had all their own little silos. And I said, well, there's 25 of you, and there's one of me. So what are we going to do, you know? And they hired Levi Modern as the Indigenous Secretariat. And her first phone call was to me at Banff saying, do you have a database? And we start to collect artists from across, so that they could get information and start to develop things. But anyway, we did that partnership. It was the Aboriginal Film and Video Art Alliance in partnership with the Banff Center, and we were in charge of our stuff. Mm-hmm. Now it's the Banff Indigenous Arts Program. That's why I say institutions don't change, and partnerships, when they have the resources and the money, like the money and the power, the control, we're not equal. It's like, why get married if you're not equal partners? Yeah. And so, like we got two two-piece, that's it. And I asked for the Max Bell Center as a building to have our own space even, and we never get that. And so there's like, this is not the first time that that's happened to us. Have you heard of these ends? Because it was Maria and a lot of people in Saskatchewan, artists were a collective that was formed to make a partnership with Parks Canada at Beaucage, to have a place for Métis artists to create culture in a contemporary way, because we're not just a past culture, we're a living culture. So all this work went down to have that, and we would have meetings with Parks. And again, I was working, trying to get that memorandum of understanding with Parks Canada. And you know who sabotaged that one? Our own political leadership, because they had a Métis management board at Parks, and they wanted to control the dollars and the artists and everything else. Like, they want control, like our own leadership. So, like, how the hell can you have partnerships in situations that don't respect you, storytellers and artists, as equals? And like the Métis nations, political bodies across the land that want artists for benefits, that want artists to give their art or their time to when they need it, but they don't give anything back to support the artists. It's like, how come we don't have our own Métis Arts Council in this time? That is funded and supported, where we decide how things work, not any other institution. So these are journeys that I've been on in my life as an artist, and they take a lot of work to organize community things or to try to change, but I've stopped. I'm not doing no more trying to change institutions. That hurts too much, and you get betrayed. And it's like when Jason asked me about Shushkitew a couple years ago, to come on, and I said, oh, I don't know, been there, done that. It's too hard. But at the same time, I believe in the youth and I believe in the future, so I'm here to lend my support or whatever I can so that we can thrive, so the youth can thrive, because that's where it's at. That's where they are the future. That's and how can we best support them and going forward? And what do we have as elders or senior artists to offer them in terms of connecting each other to what's important? That's it.
No, we're going to have you talk more, but I just want to pull on some threads. I think what's really incredible about this panel is that you're all creatives, you're all artists, you're all makers, but you also take it upon yourselves to step into roles for other things, advocating for youth suicide prevention, advocating for water, advocating for policy change in your capacities both as artists and as community members. And I think that's really incredible. I think it shows just how much what we do isn't just restricted to art, but it's also about bettering our communities as a whole. I want to pull on some threads that you had, Marjorie, and bring Jim into the conversation in terms of being, the two of you are really formative change makers. And I think that's something that's oft overlooked is where Métis folks have been in terms of change making in this country within the arts. And so I want to pull on your work, Jim, with SCANA and the fact that this organization really changed the landscape of Indigenous art in the 80s and 90s, and you were part of that. So could you tell us a little bit about SCANA?
I can. I don't know if this is on or not, but I don't know. Anyways, I wanted to start off with basically I did this little bit of prose here that I wrote about kind of summing up a lot of people that were involved with SCANA over the years, and a lot of the people that were basically roadblocks that are kind of mentioned here and there. But anyway, I just titled this, I Was There, 35 years. I was there when Gerald McMaster was still an artist, when David General, that's a long time ago, when David General and Doreen Jensen had a dream, when Alfred Youngman said no more, when Robert Hoole cried, when Lawrence Pollock Swobson stood up, when Joe David picked up a rifle. When Joan Cardinal Schubert, Jane Ash Portress, and Faye Heavyshield protested, when Dana Williams asked why, when Dana Claxton had a vision, when Eddie Portress went on to honor Venice, when the National Gallery said Daphne Ojik's work was too derivative, when Diana Nimiroff laughed at us and closed the door, when Leanne Martin unveiled cultural apartheid, when Alex Janvier scorned them, when Bob Boyer lit his pipe, when Barry Ace danced, when Shirley Thompson stared down at the table, when Norville entered the National Gallery, when Daphne Ojig spoke the truth, when Carl Beam gave us hope, when Mike MacDonald talked of gardens, when Rebecca stunned Venice, when Vivian Gray argued for us, when Ryan Rice led the youth, when Ahasu unlocked minds, when Pierre Theberge asked me, what do you want? When I told him access and respect, when I told him solo exhibitions for our artists, when I told him we needed our own curator. And I was there to see this all come to pass. So I want to go on a little bit. Sorry.
You got me choked up.
I want to go on and just talk a little bit more. I wrote this down because I can't find sometimes it's really hard to talk. Like I'm trying to condense a lot of stuff into just a few minutes here. So it's hard to do 35 years in 10 minutes. Anyways, for those who don't know me, I am from the Egg Lake, Morinville, Legal area of Alberta. I was born in British Columbia. That's my homeland is that area. Even though my relatives originated at St. Norbert's Parish in Manitoba. I've been involved with, something I should like to mention here also is that some of us elder people here grew up in the 50s and 60s. And that sort of time zone affects the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. So I think we kind of come into our ideas of fighting from our youth.
Yeah.
So anyways, I was going to get on to this. I say that I've been involved with Indigenous art activism since about 1987, primarily with SCANA in my position as a curator, Indigenous curator at the Alberta, Nova Scotia, and as my role as an officer at Canada Council for the Arts. And I've witnessed many, many changes, good, positive, hard-fought changes over that time. But as a witness, I want to say this. I always thought that it'd be easier if I was white, but I don't know. At 67, I've grown to so accustomed to where my racial identity has placed me. I really don't know. White women I've known are of a different thinking. Indigenous women I've known say, damn right. But I always think that because I'm Métis and male, I have it easier. I've never been on the white side of things, but in my life, sometimes, as the head of a movement, I've stopped and wondered how it would be like to be on the other side of the table. It just seems so easy. My time at Canada Council wasn't eye-opening. I knew there'd be challenges, but what saddened me was how the majority white staff knew absolutely nothing about our people. The difference between Treaty and Métis, the difference between Inuit and other Indigenous peoples. They had no knowledge of our history, no knowledge of residential schools, the Métis resistance, or the forced relocation of Inuit peoples. Let me tell you, all of us who worked there, had to revisit many lifelong prejudices. It wasn't an easy place to work. We were told we could not smudge a room before meeting. People thought it was unnecessary to say a prayer before getting together. And because we could not speak French, we were often left out of the conversation. I spent almost 16 years there. I witnessed the always slow transition from being suspect to being trusted. We were good at our jobs, damn good. But no one was ever promoted. Our lack of French was the excuse, but I think it was more of that old, thick, blood-driven racism that no one wanted to admit to. Still, change was made. Artists were put on peer assessment committees. Indigenous curators got to visit international biennales like Venice and Sydney. Traditional or cultural art was finally accepted as contemporary. Money was allotted to purchase Indigenous art, and grants to organizations which included Indigenous programming were favored. So, about change. For those who are involved now, patience and steadfastness are necessary. Work towards your goal, build on what is there, celebrate those little victories. Our people will be here till the end of time. The dominant society better get used to us, because our youth, like the generations before, will keep on the fight. So.
Hey. Wow.
I think Tristan and I'm speaking for you, but please correct me if I'm wrong, are willing to take up that charge and that challenge of leading things forward. I think we are. Are we ready for that?
We're doing it.
And yeah, and I want to acknowledge the two of you as what we talked about in our prep meeting as bushwhackers. But there's lots of other bushwhackers in this room, and so Marcy Miigwech, for all the work you did and have done and continue to do to make it safe for us to even just gather in a space like this. And so I kind of want to talk about that relation. We talked a little bit about this in our pre-meeting. Jim, you weren't there, but I think you've kind of alluded to that youthful spirit, and how do we encourage youth to actually take up these leadership roles with full understanding that once upon a time you were once youth and you fought the battle too. So not finding ourselves in a place of being jaded or thinking it's not possible to create change. And I hear what you're saying, Marjorie, but I'm wondering, are there roles that we could play as younger folks, both inside and outside institutional spaces, or do we just need to create something entirely new? Like, what sort of changed as seasoned professionals? What change do you feel we need right now that Tristan and I could consider moving forward?
We need our own spaces on the land where we can be who we are without anybody else's rules. That's what I think. And that's what the youth need. That's what they're when we gather together for out on the land or have camps or go, we've been gathering at the crossing over the years, but it's not consistent. Like, we don't have like one place or places that are consistently there that people can come. Like, people here, like, say we exchange with each other, then we go away, and then where did the youth go? Like, where can they go to access all this wealth of knowledge or exchange? It's like we need more residencies, we need more artists in residence in communities or art centers in communities instead of just sports centers. We need, to be promoting for those things where people can come together and share stories and heal each other with their stories and their art. That's what I think. That has to be there.
Jim, what about you?
I agree with everything she said, but I think if I can add anything, I really think the idea of especially for urban youth, there was a thing called the Crow Hop Cafe down in Rhéanne a few years ago that I think was really helpful for a lot of Indigenous youth to get together and to do their thing, whether it was skateboarding or whether it was stand-up comedy or fiddling or anything that they wanted to do. There was those sort of venues were important, and they still are important. I think our youth still need those things. I don't know if there's any programs. I've been out of the council for a number of years now, but those sort of programs I think are vital for our youth, and because it brings youth together. And when youth get together, they talk, they plan, and they organize. And things get started from there. So I really like to see more of that sort of programming happening throughout urban areas across Canada, not just maybe Regina, but downtown east side of Vancouver, down in Goldingen Street in Halifax.
Intergenerational too. Like right now, the funding is all in silos as well for youth, 18 to 30 or 12 to 18 or whatever. But it's like it's things go on. These are things that we can focus on, and the idea of our own Métis Council I think is important. I think it's something that we should kind of strive for, and we should actually have. It should actually be federally funded because it's for a whole nation. It's not just for here, And then we have no more excuses.
We can't do
Because
this,
it's
can't
there.
do that, but then we'll have our own.
Yeah. Tristan, would you agree with what our elders have to say, or would you add anything?
Well, I
In
worked
terms
as
of
a community school recreation coordinator, planning all the extracurricular activities that happened outside of class time in my home community of Buffalo Narrows for a few years. And what that taught me is the importance of asking the youth themselves, what do you need? Because the needs will change community to community. There is no umbrella solution. And in northern, rural, remote, hard-to-reach places where people can't even have their babies in town because there is no hospital, the school is often the de facto hub of the community. It's the only place that can host the broader community. And so I know of communities that their schools close down because somebody dies and that's where they have the funeral. So could you imagine being a youth who plays basketball in a gym where you've grieved the loss of your grandmother or an uncle? Like they don't have spaces of their own, so these institutionally built spaces with their rules are the only thing they kind of have access to socialize with each other, and so then it's always socializing within the rules of an institutional context. So as a community school recreation coordinator, I wouldn't just plan things and say, this is what's happening, this is the calendar, read what's gonna be on Monday. I would say, okay. Okay, grade 12s, I'm gonna give you Friday night. That is your evening. The school will belong to you. What do you wanna do? We wanna watch a horror movie. I'm like, oh, I hate scary movies. Well, then don't watch it. But that's what we want to do. So, you know, they bought this scary, creepy movie off Amazon. I rolled in the data projector, set up their movie, and was the whole time. And I remember some of those youth had already watched this scary movie, so when they knew there was a grotesque part coming up, they'd look at me to watch my reaction and get more entertainment out of the disgusted look on my face. So yeah, just giving them agency, giving them voice, giving them opportunity to describe what they need or what they want, and also helping them differentiate between a want and a need. Because I've said no. I mean, I've said that sounds like a want, not a need. That's all I would add to that.
The wants and needs conversation. I've had that many times with my family. Thank you for sharing that. I think, to me, that says a lot about the need for Shushkitew, or for this work that we're doing, to really be done in conversation, not just with youth and what they want and need, but then also reflecting on your experiences as elders and senior artists in terms of some of the things that you struggled to achieve when you were doing this work as youth, and how can we pick up that work and carry it forward. Marjorie, you talked a little bit about the challenge of partnerships. What sort of partnerships do you think we actually need in order to get what we want and need? And we've kind of already talked a little bit about it, but I kind of want to bring it back around.
I'm not sure. Equal. You come to the table with people who have done the work, and there's respect on both sides. It's like with all there are good allies out there. You have to find them. But there has to be that equal respect on both sides and that reciprocity on both sides. It has to be equal, I think. It's not impossible, but there's places where if they don't share the power, the decision making, who's making the decisions?
Jim, what was it like for you at council? How did you navigate that space? I realize you weren't the only Indigenous person that worked there, but I can't imagine that was easy. And this, I think, is a fact before I'll have you respond. For those of us that do work in institutions, you kind of become isolated in some sense as like the one person who's pushing for change in these institutional spaces. So what supports would you have wanted when you were at council doing that advocacy and change-making work that you didn't have at the time?
I didn't have any respect. I was always kind of like the outsider. So you have to kind of place it, you're kind of used to that anyways. So you go with the flow with that and just use your own experience on that. What kind of help would I have liked to have had? Well, I did have help from my other colleagues, for like encouragement and such. The arguments I had to make were basically just human rights. And we have a right to our own artwork. We have a right to have our traditional art considered contemporary. Because remember, Canada Council set up for contemporary art only. And in the white world, that's a totally different thing then. But I said, these moccasins were just made yesterday. They're contemporary. They're ours, This is our artwork. And they said, well, if you just do that, well then every other minority group in Canada is going to want to have traditional art too. And I said, no. Our art comes from here. They can go to their own country and get their traditional training that they need. So that was the argument I put forward, and they couldn't really argue with it because it's particularly the Francophone Canadians were very, very, very stiff on because my boss was Francophone. He was very stiff on that idea of not allowing traditional art in because. Then everybody else would want to. He says he's wanted to mention
so
the lace makers of Quebec, or why can't they get considered to be traditional art or contemporary art? And I said, well, they can go to France and maybe get it there because that's where they come from. But yeah, there was just those. There wasn't much other support though. I mean, you just had to slog through it and keep going with it and like I said. Celebrate your little victories. If you get little victories, boy, that's a big thing in an institution. So getting that passed, this is getting Aboriginal art as contemporary. It was a big thing. It put us out of the museum and put us into contemporary, into art galleries. Just through that program, it helped a lot.
Yeah. That makes me think of what you were saying, Marjorie, about founding the Aboriginal Video and Media Arts Alliance. The fact that it's particularly with your own filmmaking, because you weren't making, stereotypically Indigenous film, it was actually hard for you to get support. And so you had to create it yourself, in some sense, along with Maria and others.
Oh, well, we all tried to find places to tell our stories. Mostly self-produced and was community-based in doing stories with the people that didn't have people that don't have voices or no place that would listen to their stories or weren't heard in the mainstream stories. Those are the stories that I would be witness to or part of, and I was there with my camera, and I did what I could, and it wasn't considered professional, even though I went to film school, learned the trade, but I didn't have the big bucks, I didn't have the glitz. I wasn't one of the cool kids. I was older when I started out, 40, that was 35 years ago. So I looked around when I came out of school, and there was no place for me to work, or with the artist-run centers. When we're there, and you make enough noise, they'll listen to you, but as soon as you're out of the door, they don't think about you anymore. Like, that has been my experience right across the land. Like, I've worked in lots of different artist-run centers trying to make my work. And so I got some artist residencies, and those were helpful because I could get things done that I couldn't otherwise afford to do. And that was before you could do it at home on your own computer. Like when I started out, you had to go to a center. You had to go to a production place. So yeah, you had tried so many times. I don't know, I can't count how many times tried to make changes in these places. I sat on their boards. I was at the Sask Arts Council making policy changes, going to meetings, you know, making space, trying to do that institutional change. What I'm saying is, like, they'll welcome you to a certain extent as long as they don't have to change too much. Like, they absorb a certain amount of change because it makes them look good. But it's not, their basic institution has not changed. It's the same with the Canada Council. We have all these programs, but we're still having to fill out those goddamn forms with and try to put our story in a box or our ways, and it's like none of these things are relevant. And then if you've sat on juries and you have to use their number system and all of that, and you have to discuss these things that are supposedly changed to make it better, but it's still the same old. Like, it hasn't really changed, is what I'm saying. It's not Indigenous. And you can't indigenize an institution. So it either is or it isn't, and it's like, like when you're talking about indigenizing the university, well, if it was an Indigenous university, it would be the language of the instruction would be the language of the land it sits on. Then it would be an Indigenous university or closer, because that's where the worldviews come from, right? And as long as it's within that worldview, nothing's changed. And it's like they don't understand. All of them that I've ever had to deal with don't understand that this is a different worldview, this is a different value system, this is a different way of relating. And we're not about, you know, their hierarchies, we're not about all of that. We're about connecting with each other, and it just doesn't matter to them they don't get it, because they've never experienced that. And it's only when they sit with us in our circles or our ceremonies or our things that they get a bit of an inkling of who we are, but just an inkling. So it's like, okay, already. It's like, that's my choice right now, is that I've only got so much life left. Where do I want to put my energy? And it's with the youth. And whatever they need to carry forward, that's what I can do.
So I'm thinking about, there's obviously some big changes we need to make, maybe no changes at all, doing away with this attempt to always try and change institutions, or maybe there's micro changes. So it seems like there's a lot of, I guess, opportunity or potentiality for a better future, but how we go about that, I think, has to be determined as a collective together. Are we satisfied with micro changes like we have been for the past 35 years? Or do we need to see big shifts? And if so, what do they look like? And then it makes me think about the conversation we had online, Tristan, about the role of social media in change making. So I want to start there, and then Marjorie and Jim, if you're active on socials, let us know what you think about the role of social media in change making.
Okay. So there was a time when an author selling 3,500 copies was considered a bestseller in Canada. In a matter of 3 weeks, my Walks Facebook page amassed over 8,000 followers. And so every post we wrote was getting double which of something that could be considered a best-selling in Canada only like 15 years ago. So it just kind of shows that we have opportunity to bypass traditional ways of reaching the broader public with our stories and with our narratives, where we take full control of the narrative. And having experience talking to media, and in Western Canada it's very conservative, they change their narratives. They could take direct quotes from you, but put them in contexts and alongside thoughts and ideas that kind of change its interpretation. And I remember calling journalists back saying, why did you, first of all, misquote me? Because you had that conversation recorded, so did I. That's not what I said. Change the spelling, change those words. I didn't say this. And she's like, oh, sorry, we use this text from audio software, and it makes some mistakes sometimes. And it's like, what don't you have an editor? Isn't there a human that looks this over? Yeah, he must have missed it. And yeah, anyway, so they would change these misquotes and stuff, and I remember thinking, how many people are going to read this? You know? It's a local Saskatchewan paper. It's probably biggest demographic is the geriatric wing of their old folks' home. Not exactly the power demographic I'm looking for in regards to the issue I'm bringing up. So I thought, screw it, I'm not going to talk to these local small newspapers anymore. I'm just going to post on my Facebook page. I mean, there's more people on that page than there is in that town, so there we go. Yeah, there's an example.
Well, I was a techno peasant before I went to film school. I didn't even own a TV. I was against technology, and I thought it was evil. I think I still do to some extent. One of the first events that we had at Banff was called Drum Beats to Drum Bites. And that was when the internet was just starting. And we gathered together people who had knowledge in our communities from all over to talk about this technology. And I remember they said, we don't want to be roadkill on the information highway. And we had a lot of conversations that whole weekend about who controls the internet. And that was before it was commercialized. It was supposed to be an educational network, an information sharing network. It was never a commercial network at that time. It was just information sharing. Now it's totally commercialized, and there's all these private companies and people on it. There's no protection. Who has copyright? We put stuff up there, and people can just take it. There's all these protocols or non-protocols or whatever around all of that. So we talked about that a lot. And I'm looking at what it's true that it is the media that connects young people and also connects us to the world in ways that we didn't have before. I mean, I agree with that reach that it has. But there's so much out there, and it's like one day it's like you're bombarded. But how much of it do people take in? And does it the speed of the media or the change and like the constant bombardment kind of starts to make you numb, and it kind of starts to make you turn off your heart. Like I think about the difference between like film, which was made based on how many times you blink in a minute, 16 frames per second. It was a human technology. It was 1 foot candle that lit 1 foot, and it was like all organic. But it's like now it's all little pixels on a screen, and they're not real images, and they're all coming at you like bullets to me. Like it's I shut down. So yeah, the media is there. How do we have control over it is the question, Always for me is like, who controls it? And they can shut us down anytime. There's some posts that have not been allowed on Facebook that I put up. They take them down. So there are these censors and gatekeepers in that system too.
Jim, final thoughts?
I think the internet's evil.
Yeah.
I've seen what it's done down in the United States with all the conspiracy theories and how people, vast majority of people have taken up on a lot of these political views that are just so outlandish and so unbelievable, but people really get sucked into it. So I do believe that the internet's evil. There is good things, I guess, that can come out of evil, but I think what you're doing, and you got an audience that is probably youth orientated more than elderly like I would be, but I think it can work for certain things, but it's limited. It's a limited benefit right now. It distances us from each other too, and I'd rather sit down in a circle than I would have a Zoom call. I mean, the Zoom meetings were wonderful during the pandemic, but there's still such that distance between realities that I don't really appreciate. So that's just my age speaking, I guess. But yeah, I still believe the internet's very evil.
I guess so. As a final thought, it has potential to bring us together, especially for youth culture today. I think a lot of folks they engage socially online more perhaps than in person, so I don't think we can ignore it.
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
I bought a bookshelf. There was a wrench in the bookshelf assembly package, and there was a warning on the wrench. Do not get carried away with the destructive potential of this tool.
Wow. Really? Oh no.
Social media, it's a tool. How are we using it? That's the question.
Yeah.
It's the hands it's in, because the people have agency of the content they put into the online virtual space.
Yeah.
So that's a great question that we can use for the breakout sessions. How can we harness this tool of social media for change making? And Maria had their hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something. I'm getting kind of frustrated listening because we're in Saskatchewan and it sounds like everything is hopeless. I know that what you guys are talking about is really important, and because I was a part of that. But we're sitting in this really beautiful place, and half of the art that's in that gallery was started at kitchen tables and little tables in offices at Gabriel Dumas Institute. We weren't able to get published in some of the mainstream publishing houses. Gabriel Dumas Institute was able to find money scrounging so that we could get published in our own languages, using our own stories and not having to make change. We also were able to make videos. We were able to hook rugs. We were able to do beadwork. We were able to start speaking our language. That's why Métis is spoken all over the place. And there's artists all over as a result of that. And, institutions do die eventually, some of them. We've had people in the last 35 years, Marjorie, you know that, so do you, Jim, in places like Canada Council, our own people, who didn't do very damn much for any of us, except go in there and take up space in enclosed space so that we couldn't even get up and speak out because we had to fight with them and look like we were fighting in public. And I just, when we didn't have any money, we paid for things ourselves. And to sit here and talk like we're a whole bunch of victims, we're not victims, we're survivors. We've been able to do the kinds of things that we have today because we got up and we just did it. And, all of you have done that. We have to give credit to our own people in our own communities who have stuck their necks out so that we could get this done. And I'm feeling depressed. And we have no reason to be depressed. When we talk about we need a whole lot of space, Dylan built a kitchen table out there. when I was a little kid, kitchen tables were where you laid out the dead, where you had your wakes on top of them, you had your feasts, you birthed your babies, you did your beadwork, you did your cooking, you told your stories, you made snowshoes, you did all those things. That's part of my heritage as a Métis person. And Dylan's title is that the thing that's wrong with us is that nobody visits anymore. We sit in places like this that are sterile, and we want to be white people, we want to be well off and show off and everything, instead of going into our own spaces to do that. And I'm as responsible for that as everybody else. But, you know, don't sound like we're all a bunch of welfare recipients, because we're not. We never have been. Talk about the kinds of really important and big things we've done in the last 300 years. We can celebrate those kinds of things. That's the art that's hanging out there. That's the art of people who have survived. And, you know, I don't want to put you guys down, but Jesus, Marjorie, you've done some pretty neat things. Jim, you've done some pretty wonderful things, and you've had community support, all of you, to do that, from people like us. You know, but it wasn't like everybody went around and made their own little videotapes with their own money. That's not true. I never made a video with my own money. It was done by what money community could scrape together. We did the same thing with our plays. We did the same thing with everything else. If institutions don't make change, why do we always kneel down in front of them? I'm going to give myself a heart attack.
No.
I want to add one thing. Yeah, thank you, Maria. I wanted to mention that I'm friends with a young girl from La Ronge, Saskatchewan, Destiny Schaefer. You could look her up. She would create this beautiful, hyper-realistic acrylic art. She was a phenomenal painter, self-taught. Her grandma was a painter. And I told her, like, week after week, month after month, please make a Facebook page. Please put your art on Facebook. And she said, I don't want to. I was like, no, but people will see it, and they'll probably want to buy it. Because every year when there would be like a little craft show at our local friendship center, she would bring some of her paintings, maybe sell like 3 or 4, and then she would wait for the next year to be hosted in a gymnasium space where people and the public could have access to her work. And I said, you know, there's only like 100 people that go to that craft show. If you made a Facebook page, you could potentially have hundreds of followers that would share your work to their hundreds of followers, and more people would be potentially interested in buying it. So she made a Facebook page, and she decided to paint a time lapse of a painting. In 24 hours, 2.1 million views. Mm-hmm. She woke up a week later, her page had 57,000 followers. She would never post a painting without it selling in the first hour. And as she would paint 3 or 4 paintings a week, they were going out like hotcakes. Like, she was selling cupcakes at a bake sale, but they were $500 a piece. And so when art galleries would then approach her, we would really like to display some of your work. She'd say, no thanks. Because they would be like some smaller-ish galleries and provincial galleries, and that's okay, that's fine. But her work didn't necessarily need that, A, to be seen, valued, and or sold. And so she bypassed institutional dependence or need, never wrote a single grant, and is a very antisocial kind of being in that she's shy and just creates all this out of her bedroom. Literally, her artist studio space is her bed. She paints in her bed a lot. And she was my neighbor, and we're about the same age, and we're best friends since the age of 6. So just watching her be able to transcend the need to kneel down to institutions, and like harnessing the power of social media for the positive potential, showed me that I could do the same. So I'd post fiddle videos. People would inbox me, could you come fiddle at this, could you come fiddle at that? And that was my way of not needing a manager or a space or representation, because I'm able to represent myself.
Oh,
Thanks, Tristan. I'm just going to wrap up. Oh, Auntie Val.
Can we please have you use the signs
Yeah. I'll just, Maria, thank you, Marcy Miigwech, for your comments. I just want to assure you that as an individual, I remain hopeful that change is possible, and that's part of the reason why we founded Shushkitew, was because we do believe it's possible. And in hosting this panel, it was an attempt on my part to acknowledge the change-making work that's come before and what's happening now, and to identify what we need to do moving forward.